Bonjour à tous, merci d'être connectés pour ce nouveau séminaire du PIMM. Aujourd'hui, nous avons la chance de recevoir le professeur Jan ZEMAN, qui est professeur à la Czech Technical University in Prague. Thank you very much for being here, for accepting to present
My pleasure.
seminar series. You will have about 45 minutes to present your work, and then we'll have a discussion. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I will just start tracking my time. So yeah, thank you very much for very kind introduction. So the topic I would like to talk about today, the announced title of the seminar. Oh, just a moment. All right, so the topic I would like to talk about today and the announced title of the seminar is Wank tiles for modeling and simulation of heterogeneous materials. I'll try to briefly explain you what this whole business is about. But of course, I would like to start first with the most important thing, and that is acknowledging the main contributors to this work, who are mainly Jan Novak, who is my colleague in Prague, and mainly Martin Doškář. Basically, what I'm presenting today constitutes the main body of his PhD thesis. And we are all affiliated to the Faculty of Civil Engineering of Czech Technical University in Prague. How this whole work was motivated, it's actually quite a long story, but it was not motivated by some concrete application, but rather by some theoretical interest. So for some years, actually, we were working with microstructures or heterogeneous materials, and you constantly encounter this kind of question. So how to represent some heterogeneity of your microstructure in their models, and how to perform simulation based on this information. And the way how we see it is that in almost all cases, this is a certain compromise between accuracy of representing your microstructure and your ability of being able to treat it efficiently. This is almost always the case with a single exceptions, and these are periodically ordered, or if you wish, periodic materials, which are characterized by the way that the whole geometry can be compressed to a single cell, and based on this representation, you can reconstruct your actual heterogeneity pattern by repeating the cell in horizontal and vertical directions. And as a bonus, actually, there is quite well-developed theory behind that. So this is well understood from the point of view of applied mathematics. And for instance, in the field of computational mechanics, this kind of survey paper by Michel, Moulnier, and Suquet, apologies for my pronunciation, is a standard reference for me. So, I mean, this is all well-founded. The problem is that if you encounter some more realistic materials, as you all well know, presumably, which show some degree of disorder, the situation is much less straightforward. So one approach I like very much, because I spent most of my PhD thesis working on this topic, is the concept of so-called statistically equivalent periodic unit cell. So the idea is very simple. I will still rely on a single cell, which is repeated in this periodic manner, as you can see here, but I'll try to construct it in a more clever way. How this is usually done is that you parameterize your original structure and you solve some optimization problem, which gives you the placement of your parameters in the cell such that you resemble some structural statistics, hence the adjective statistically. So this is basically something which works relatively well, I would say, for problems with clearly separated scales. And it might work in some cases. And by the way, this is the founding work which started all that. But of course, there is some intrinsic restriction of this whole approach. And this is based on the fact that your original microstructure shows some disorder, which is often modeled as by some statistical considerations and is non-periodic. But by construction, what you actually get is that you take this disordered microstructure, you store the whole information into this deterministic information, and you also reconstruct it in a deterministic manner. So you basically kill all the randomness. So the standing question now remains how to do it better. So how to still retain the possibility of taking your original material microstructure, compress it somehow so you can work with that efficiently, but also have the opportunity to reconstruct it in a way which is non-periodic and is also able to give you multiple realizations of your microstructure. So you have some variability in your microstructural model. So this is basically the motivation how to tackle this issue. And what I will try to show in the first part of my presentation, that there is a concept which actually was founded in mathematical logic and later used in computer graphics, which allows you to do so. Once I will introduce this is this concept of ventiling, which appear already in the title of my talk. Once I will introduce the basics, then I will show some design strategies, how to describe the geometry, and show two applications on determining homogenized properties of disordered materials, and also later on to perform some simulations on the fully resolved problems. Okay, so to the first point, I mean this whole concept of ventiles in the particular setup of material microstructure modeling is actually a very specific case of considerations which were given first, as far as I know, by Leo and Shapiro, which claim that a microstructural model can be understood as a process which allows you to generate individual realization of your material with matching spatial statistics. So this is basically the concept. So how we approach the problem is that we start with this statistically equivalent periodic unit cell. So we start with some piece of the material we would like to work with, but we extend it in two ways. The first one is that we do not consider only one sample of our material, but we have multiple of those. There are of the same size, and we will call them tiles, or I will call them tiles in what follows. The second thing is that these samples are not completely arbitrary. If you imagine that each of the edges of that corresponding tile is assigned a specific color, like here, this green, yellow, red, and blue, the tiles are designed in specific manner, which allows actually, which ensures, if you return to the previous slide, that on the corresponding edges, actually the microstructure is exactly preserved. So there is no discontinuity if you go from one tile to another. So you can see that this is indeed a generalization to the statistically equivalent periodic unit cell in the context of material modeling, because if you have only one tile, which has one color reserved for horizontal and one color, for vertical, and one color reserved for horizontal edges, you are back in the setup of this periodic media. And well, as already announced, this whole concept of edged matching tiles and an attempt to tile with these objects in finite plane, this was actually the concept which was introduced by Wang. The main motivation there was some elementary logic. So this is the representation on which I will build on. So this is how I would like to store my material. But please recall that in that original definition, I also need some means how to generate individual realizations. And for that purpose, we will basically borrow some ideas from computer graphics. I will cite a specific reference later on. But imagine now that you would like to fill some domain of interest, which is visualized here by this grid, by the material which is composed of these tiles, and you can really proceed entry by entry of your reference domain by skyline type of algorithm. So if I will start with this first cell, I have no constraints from previous generation, so I can randomly pick one of these 8 possible instances of my microstructure and place it in the position. So assume that I already done so. In the next step, actually, I will observe that here I have this vertical green color active. So from my set, I can now pick randomly again a subset which satisfies this geometrical constraint. So on the left edge, I need to see the green color, which is precisely the case here. And by that, I can randomly pick one of these 4 microstructural samples and place it here. And this is this announce reference. This is when we actually borrow this idea. By that, I can move to another entry in my grid. Here I have this vertical red color active, which constrains my possible microstructures to these 4 possible choices. So I randomly pick one of these 4, place the next one, which incidentally has exactly the same color here. So the situation repeats itself. The same again appears here. I will tile the last row. So I will proceed to the second one. I can proceed in completely analogous manner. So now I see here that on top edge, I have this yellow color, which actually identifies these 4 candidates out of this, these 4 candidates out of this set of possible 8 configurations. And by that, I can proceed. The most general way I can encounter is this situation when I have this 2 matching codes. One is green horizontal, the second, one is yellow horizontal, the second is green vertical. And here I have 3 installments of my microstructure possible, which satisfy this geometrical constraint. And because this is the most constraining case, and by construction, I have ensured that I always am able to select from at least 2 possibilities, I'm getting something which is stochastic. So if I run my algorithm again, I will get different microstructure realization, but it's all based on this compressed representation of 8 microstructural samples. So in another word, I have some freedom by selecting the number of microstructural samples and by assigning these color codes to their horizontal and vertical edges to make my generation algorithm more or less random and more or less complex. So I am adding some flexibility. And of course, I have always this sanity check that if I will select that I have only one tile, let's say this one, with same codes on vertical and horizontal edges, I'm back in this statistically equivalent periodic unit cell. So this is how I understand my modeling of material microstructure. This is how I generate my individual realizations. But now, of course, come the crucial question, how these tiles can be designed. So what I will try to briefly comment on in my talk are 3 possibilities, but depending or independently on the technique I will use, actually I have some generic requirements on the tile design. First is that they must be designed such that they meet this relaxed periodicity of ink tilings, meaning that the microstructure which is shared with the same edges of the same code must remain the same. And second is that these tilings which I generate are representative of the true material in a certain sense. So the first approach we tried, and this was really the beginning of our work quite some time ago already, is so-called optimization-based algorithm, which is actually borrowed directly from this construction of the statistically equivalent periodic unit cell. So we are interested in design one tile only. So what we basically did is that we extended the procedure to this more flexible parameterization. So the underlying idea is relatively straightforward. So we have for instance, are 8 tiles in which we would like to store the microstructure. Let's assume that we are trying to model, for instance, some monodisperse cylinder type of microstructure, so very simple one. So we take as the parameters of my microstructures positions of individual particles within individual tiles. And what we also need to take into account is that, for instance, if some particle like this one intersects this vertical edge, then actually the same information must appear in all corresponding edges. So if you are trying to generate some periodic cell of your material, this is the constraint you take into account naturally. Here you must do some additional bookkeeping because the periodicity is relaxed, or it can be seen as some kind of multi-periodicity if you would like to do so. And once you have your parameterization at hand, then you solve some optimization problem and try to match the spatial statistics of your original system by realizations of your microstructures. So again, if interested, the full details are given here. It is something which is rather generic. It works in some cases, but the reason why we actually abandon this path completely is that this is critically slow. So you are basically required to solve some multidimensional optimization problem. The cost function in most cases is non-convex, so you have to resort to some very inefficient optimization algorithms. So what are the alternatives? So the alternative number one, it's so-called sample-based tile design, which is again an idea we borrowed from computer graphics. So basically it works in a way that you take your original microstructure or picture or texture if you wish, and depending on the number of codes you need, you select a certain samples which are of the size of a given tile and are rotated by 45 degrees, as you may imagine. So you take those samples, you rotate them to the standard position, and you allow them to overlap to a certain width. So this is the first step which you do. In the second step, you basically cut each of these tiles diagonally, as you can see here. And when designing one tile, like the one which is shown here, you take one of these halves and you allocate it to a given tile. So this is then the edge of the tile, and because you are cutting it here in half, you basically ensure that everything will be continuous as you require. Because of that overlap, however, you have certain regions in this resulting structure when there is some ambiguity in which patch of the microstructure needs to be used. So you must invoke some image quilting algorithm in order to basically take these pictures and literally sew them together. So this is what we did. What we also added to this computer graphics consideration is that we tried to tune this optimal overlap width in order to actually make sure that the spatial statistics of the original and reconstructed system is possible, like in the previous approach. And what we also tried to experiment with, that on top of that, we also selected independent pieces of the structure we are working with, and we patched them with the tile interiors to add even more diversity to the set. So if you use that, it is a highly efficient procedure because it was invented in computer graphics. It is representative because you work directly with microstructural samples, so you do not construct them artificially, you have them. But of course, it has some disadvantages, and this disadvantage is related to the fact that at some regions of your structure, you must quilt this microstructure, so you must combine the information from different parts, and this is not always possible. So if you are interested in some fine details of the microstructure, this may get disrupted by this quilting operation. But apart from that, actually, the procedure works fantastically, at least to my experience. So this is an example of aluminum-based foam, two-dimensional sections. This is our reduced representation of the microstructure. This is something which was taken directly from microstructural micrographs. Well, if you have, for instance, the information available from different parts of your specimen, for instance, this gives you the way how to fuse them together. And again, in fraction of seconds, you can generate stochastic realizations of your structure of large sizes with very fine details at almost no cost. But for instance, for these types of materials, we also discovered that, these ligaments, which are important for mechanical performance, they must be disrupted due to the procedures involved in construction. So for that reason, actually, we also started to work on an approach which was initiated in the group of Thierry Massard in Free University of Brussels. And it is based on level set representation. So basically what I will show here is the function denoted here as L of particle, which is signed distance function from the nearest interface. And you can see it here. What is important for us is the zero level set of that function, which actually represents the shape of the particle we are working with. So this is now something which in computational mechanics is used heavily in different instances. And the algorithm we started with actually is based on this level set type of representation and works in two steps. In the step number one, we are generating some packing of particles. And in the second step, based on the particle packing and its associated level set function, we perform a certain morphing operations. So how this works for the case of Wang tiles, and again, details are given in this particular paper. So we have representation of individual tiles in terms of level set functions, which are now initiated to the maximum value, for instance. And simultaneously with that, we have something which is called admissible space. So this is a position within tiles in which we can place next particle such that there is no collision with what was placed previously. And of course, when we initialize the algorithm, there are no constraints. So let's say that we randomly place this ellipsoidal shape into the left tile. This is this associated level set function or sign distance function. And by thresholding the zero value by a certain constant value, we have the position which is prohibited for the placement if we would like to avoid overlapping of the next particle. And because in this case we were lucky enough to throw the particle inside the tile, nothing is needed, and actually we are doing exactly the same step and in Sonon's original approach. If we place the next particle, for instance, in this position, which starts to interact with the vertical edge, because of this periodicity or relaxed periodicity of the Wang tile setting, we must make sure that the sign distance function and associated level sets is copied to all vertical edges in order to ensure that they still can be sticked together. This is then also reflected in the fact that if we place the particle in this position, this allowed space for the placement of the next particle, it shrinks significantly, as can be shown here. And of course, this is by no means related to placing some circular or elliptic particles. It can work equally well with polyhedra. And yeah, you can just pick of your choice. Once the only thing you know is to be able to construct this level set function or the sign distance function, and also to compute some bounding box for that in order to make some geometric check efficiently. But this is how all things work. So once we place enough particles in our system, we get the corresponding level set. And we come to the second step, which is morphing. And this can be either relatively straightforward or a bit elaborate, but still very computational inefficient. So for instance, if we have a look at the points for which the level set is non-positive, we are able to generate particles. So from this representation, we are actually able to get this spherical inclusions in 2D and of course in 3D using exactly the same manner. If we, with the sign distance function, also add some function which gives us the same information, which is the distance to the second and third nearest interface, then using these linear combinations of these individual functions, we can, for instance, using exactly the same type of information, generate this open cell type of microstructure just by evaluating this simple condition. And using this third one, again, using this simple transformation or checking this simple condition, we can generate a microstructure like here. But again, all that is based on the same input data, which is this level set type of representation concerning the first interface and possibly second and third. But this is all possible, and in the Weng-Tao setting, it just requires some additional bookkeeping. So, for instance, using that Weng-Tao representation, again, we can generate either some particulate microstructure or porous microstructure using the same framework. And well, this intensive part of constructing this individual samples can be done completely offline. And once this is ready, it can be reused at almost zero cost. And again, if interested in more details, these are given in this relatively recent paper. Okay, so I also claimed in this motivation part that we would like to introduce some procedure which allows us to reduce or perhaps completely avoid this artificial periodicity. So in the last slides of this part, I would like to show how we were able to achieve this goal. And for that, I pick again the standard reference system, which is just equilibrium configuration of hard disks. And I can either inspect it visually, meaning looking at this black and white bitmap, or I can do it more rigorously by looking into some spatial statistics. The one which I particularly like is so-called two-point probability. So this is a function which depends on two arguments, or two position x1 and x2, and basically its meaning is that it will give you the probability that if you take a certain vector which is characterized by the two coordinates x1 and x2, you randomly throw it into medium, you will find it allocated in the given phase. Here, for instance, in this white domain. So, for instance, if these 2 points coincide, this 2-point probability is nothing else than the volume fraction of a given phase, and I can read it here in the as the single value here in that material. But of course, it carries in this picture. But of course, it carries substantially more information. So how the function looks like in the vicinity of the origin, for instance, shows you how the nearest particles are arranged. And what is of major importance in these considerations is that this function quickly stabilizes to some constant value. So if I say that, let's say this is phi, the volume fraction, the value to this rapidly converges is the phi square. And this actually is a demonstration of the fact that there is no hidden order in the structure. So if I'm looking at the probability that 2 points which are far apart are located in a given phase, this becomes independent quantity. So this is basically what this says. So there is no hidden order. So if you do the reduction in terms of statistically equivalent periodic unit cell, this is the only and single reconstruction of my medium. This is how it looks like. You can see that this is disordered, but there is some hidden pattern behind that. And this is very well visible in this 2-point probability, because you can see that this extreme here, it repeats at very specific positions, and these positions are related directly to the size of the cell to which I stored my information. So this is what I was talking about. So this is this hidden order in my system, which I just introduce it in my representation, and there's no way how to avoid that. If he do the same thing, but with the Wenck tile set, which consists of 16 tiles in this particle case, you can see visually that this the hidden order is actually missing in the picture. I'm unable to see it. You can see that the reconstructed microstructure shows this matrix-rich regions, but they are more or less disordered. If you have a look at the same picture, but through the eyes of two-point probability function, you can see that actually there is still some hidden order inside, which is now not easily to detect. This size is again related to the size of the cell to which I store my information, but these local extreme, they are substantially reduced in magnitude because I have this left randomness, this relaxed randomness in my system. So this is just to demonstrate in the simplest term possible that well, we are able to simulate much better this original completely disordered system. Okay, so this closes the part with how to represent the geometry, how to construct the individual cells, and how to generate microstructural realization out of that. But what we are interested in is, of course, some structure property type of relations. So let's have a look how this whole concept of Wenck tilings aligns with the idea of homogenization. And it took us some time, but we eventually realized that this whole setting of Wenck tilings is actually a perfect installment of a very influential work by Hue from 1990, in which he introduced the notion of so-called apparent properties and something he likes to call partition theorem. So what is the whole philosophy behind that? So let us assume that hypothetically we have this system which is here shown as finite, but actually we are interested in behavior of infinite systems, so free space type of realization of our microstructure, which actually samples all possible configurations in which these Wenck tiles can possibly appear. So by taking this hypothetical sample and subjecting it to loading which corresponds to Dirichlet and Neumann type of boundary conditions, we can imagine that we can compute something which is called homogenized properties. This is something I will call primal, and this is something I will call dual homogenized properties. So this can be, for instance, conductivity and resistivity, or the stiffness or compliance, if you wish. And of course, this is completely, and these are reciprocal to each other. So this is something which can be shown. Of course, this is something out of reach because this is intrinsically infinite, but we have, and the only thing we have access to is some finite size approximation. So that partition theorem says that if our finite size approximations or finite size installments of this original, or windows, if you wish, of this infinite pattern are subsets of the previous one, then there is this hierarchy of the primal and dual homogenized problems. So they can be bounded from above in the sense of quadratic norm. So this is what this strange symbol means. By the equivalent homogenized properties, but of finite size, and these are nested. So this is a certain Hewitt hierarchy on this homogenized properties because they are nested together. And if you think it over, this is precisely the case of Wenck tilings because we have this reduced representation. And because, of course, these are not the true homogenized ones, but only their approximations in an appropriate sense, there are called as apparent properties. So this is the name or adjective which you had coined. And these are defined as the mean values of the individual configurations of my structure when this NS just stands for the number of possible microstructural samples of a given size S. So here, for instance, I'm interested in all possible configurations of 2 by 2 tiles, 1 by 10 tiles, 3 times t tiles, etc. So this number grows very rapidly with the number of tiles involved. And of course, for reasonable sizes, this grows to huge numbers. So what we are interested more is some statistical sampling of this property. So we just randomly pick one of these configurations. We try to estimate the mean with some confidence interval, and we try to pick the number of samples in a way that we reasonably approach these apparent properties. So actually, it was yet another influential work I will mention on the next slide, which realized that all this reasoning can be reversed in the opposite order and can be moved to computational procedure. So in their work in a work by Kanit and co-workers from 2003, they develop a procedure which combines this statistical sampling with the previous consideration. So the procedure works in a given way. So assume that I'm fixed the size I'm currently virtually testing. I'm generating realizations of my microstructure, for instance, by running this stochastic algorithm. And I keep generating until I have certain confidence in the data I get. So I increase the number of samples, the distribution of my mean value changes accordingly, and by hypothesis testing, I can actually, with some confidence interval, I can actually then make sure that I have a reliable estimate of the mean value I'm eventually interested in. So once this is done, then I can do the second hypothesis testing, and I will check whether the upper and lower bound I got by this finite size approximation, whether they deviate from the reciprocity or not to a certain user-defined tolerance. So if I test this hypothesis, I can then find out whether the size of my microstructure is sufficient. If not, I will just move to larger sample and repeat the same procedure again. So this is basically the idea of the procedure, and its specification to the rank tiling format is something which is given there. What is also quite convenient numerically is that this whole procedure computationally can be significantly accelerated with the methods of primal domain decomposition, because at the end of the day, we have our finite set of tiles and we are always working with them. So we can actually pre-compute a lot. So this then becomes much less computationally efficient. And this is just and one of examples how this procedure looks like. So this is the structure we are working with. We start with the smallest possible samples. This is actually the mean. This is how we estimate that. And by increasing the size, you can see that it actually converges from above to a certain value. You can see as the size of our specimen increases, the variability of the response stabilizes to some given value. And if we reach certain size, we actually are able to achieve the property that one is reciprocal to another. So this is basically how it works. And this is just an example of how it works in high contrast or low contrast case. And you obtain then typical graphs of that type. So with the number of tiles in your system, you can see the decay of this error, which is introduced here. And of course, all this depends on the phase contrast in your material. So you have some computational procedure how to estimate the size of your representative element and how to get your apparent properties of appropriate user-defined tolerance. Okay, so in the remaining 5 or so minutes, I would like to spend some time on explaining how we approach the last problem, and this is how to simulate really the response of materials which are built from bank tiles. So this is basically the model problem. This is the model problem which kept Martin Doškar busy for the last 2 years of his PhD. It is standard linear scalar elliptic PDE. So you may imagine heat conduction problem, for instance. We were working, you may, again, for concreteness, imagine a certain domain omega in which we just show the standard divergence, some coefficient matrix, gradient of our quantity of interest equals to right-hand side. And what is specific is the form of coefficients. So we can imagine that our domain is composed of the bank tiles, as shown here. Here I show the unique 16 tiles we are using to describe our system, just for concreteness. We can assign a unique number to given cell in our discretization, and this cell then defines which microstructure is to be patched in this particular part of the structure. So this is formalized in the following manner. So we have this characteristic function, which is related to a given tile T. The highlighted areas, for instance, here correspond what are the regions occupied by tile number 3. Hence, this characteristic function is 1 in these 2 regions and is 0 elsewhere. And these coefficients then are given locally on the level of individual tiles, which is indicated here. When this strange symbol here actually shows for a given point of interest, what is the local coordinate system? What is its position in a local coordinate system, which is aligned with the corresponding tile. So this is really complete analog of standard periodic homogenization. And just to strengthen it more, I will also call this quantity Y. Hence, each tile can be imagined to be equipped with the system. And these coefficients A now are actually associated with individual faces within my tiles, as in conventional periodic homogenization. Of course, I need to supplement my problem with boundary conditions of Dirichlet and Neumann type if needed. And I'm interested in solving this problem. But what I would like to take into account that my microstructure or my coefficients actually come from contributions of this given number of tiles. So the whole philosophy how to approach the problem is as follows. So I will take my total fully resolved solution and I will split it in 2 parts. The first one, which I will call homogeneous, is something we discretize with standard finite element method. And on top of that, I add something which is called fluctuation part. It is style-based in a sense that this fluctuation part I would like to eventually get from the information I compute locally at the level of each tile which is involved in the system. Okay, so I would like to take this part of the solution, this fluctuation part, and I would like to assemble it together like I did with the geometry. And how to do it in more concrete terms. So the technique we opted for is the standard generalized finite element method, or the partition of unity type of scheme, which is based exactly on the same philosophy and takes or approximates the unknown fields by 2 sets of functions. One are regular shape functions of the finite element method, like the one which are shown here. On top of that, I will add exactly these fluctuations, but these are multiplied together. So this so-called enriching function, which has this and that contribution, actually becomes localized to a given macroscopic finite element. So by that, we actually have still the sparsity of the system matrix and related properties, and we can work in conventional co-working settings. Well, this is the framework which has been introduced in these 2 works. Okay, and again, what we would like to do is to construct these fluctuations using some tile level reasoning. So eventually, we would like to pre-compute that on the level of individual tiles. How we do that is very much like inspired by techniques from computational or numerical homogenization. So basically on each tile, we are solving the same type of problem as on the macroscopic domain with 0 right-hand side and with the expression which says that we take the gradient of the field, which is affine in this local coordinates. On top of that, we add a certain correction or fluctuation, if you wish. And this is again written down for every tile in our set, as visualized here for 8 tiles only. We also require that this enriching function will be continuous across matching edges. So this is again this multi-periodicity constraint occurring directly in our formulation. And we also need to ensure some additional conditions on this enriching field in order to get uniqueness. So we need to fix the zero mean, basically, or some constant value. And we also require some additional consistency in order to prevent this additional contribution for preventing these linear variations. So these are the underlying ideas. How this is done is explained in this publication, which appeared very recently. So using that, actually computing that using standard finite element procedures, we can get this individual fields, which are parameterized by the affine part. So this corresponds to macroscopic gradient of a certain quantity. Here you can have a look how these look like for one example of the microstructure. If we flatten these two indices, we can actually then generate our enriching functions to the partition of unity scheme here, and then proceed standardly. So how this works is something I would like to show on this example I mentioned before. Here you can see what is the fineness of the finite element mesh, which is used in obtaining this fully resolved solution. So we really would like to make sure that the reference is rather accurate. And there are two additional parameters I will need later on. One is P, which says what are the local coordinates along this section, in which I will have a look at local solution profile. An additional parameter is this small s, which says what is the number of tiles which I fit into this region. So it actually sets the scale separation of my problem. And this is run for linear isotropic material and with quite large contrast in phase properties. So this is how the direct numerical solution looks like. So you can really see that there are fine details I would like to recover. This is what I will see from my reduced model, given here using this partition of unity type of ansatz. So if I have a look at the reference solution, this obtained by direct numerical simulation, and if you zoom through colors, you can see that actually starting from this purple one, the remaining colors cannot be distinguished. So I mean, at this fraction of the number of degrees of freedom, you get very, very accurate local fields. And using uniform refinement, we can also have a look how the relative L2 error decays with refining the microstructural mesh, and we can see that it converges. It converges sublinearly, but it's something which is convergent. So, for instance, if you are fine with 1% of your relative L2 error, which in these works is rather acceptable, you can see that you can really reduce your computational requirements in terms of number of degrees of freedom significantly. Again, details can be seen here. And with it, what is even more convenient about the framework and about how Martin actually formulated all this is that it allows for a complete local refinement. So, for instance, in this reinterned corner, which is known to be troublesome and in which you've seen that most of the errors are localized, you can switch to fully resolved microstructure on fly and get these errors in this region under control. So this is again something which we like very much about this scheme. So this brings me to conclusion. So what I hope was able to convince you that these Wenck tilings provide natural extension of periodic unit cell-based representation that allow for instant generation of microstructural samples, and they can also offer suppressed periodicity. I presented two design methods. One is based on direct microstructural samples, and second one is on level sets. And I showed two applications. One is related to homogenization, and second one is to solving in detail standard linear PDEs. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. I would like to thank the Czech Science Foundation for generously funding our work in this field for a long time. But most importantly, I would like to thank you for your time and patience. And just to brief advertisements from my side. So all this actually has been implemented by Martin into this online free service. So if you would like to try that, then you are most than welcome. And the second one is about traditional promotion. So if you are interested in full details, you can find them in these particular references. Yeah, so I'm 5 minutes over, so apologies for that, but that's everything from my part, and I'm certainly looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. I will stop the recording now.